Glad to have you join us on today's Market Report on ADBN Television. My name is Adefola Olamilekun. I already have my guest seated, Dr. Niyi Akinsiju, Financial Investment Analyst and Chairman, Independent Media and Policy Initiative, who will be helping us to understand how the federal government can leverage this current 2025 budget of 54.99 trillion naira. Doc, you're highly welcome, sir.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be with you.
All right, sir. Now, Doc, what was your reaction when you heard or when you saw that this particular budget has been jacked up from the initial 49.7 to 54.99 trillion naira?
Well, I think the first thing would be to first go and look at the components of the budget when it was jacked up.
Exactly.
Because a major concern historically for some of us had been the ratio of the recurrent budget to the capital budget. So, and being an advocate of increased capital budget, my concern was this increase, was it a reflection of an increment in the recurrent or debt and all that, or was it a reflection of the capital budget? So when I saw it and we saw the quantum leap, so to speak, you know, in the capital budget, I was excited. I was excited again because my understanding of the whole character of the budget shows that the trust it's actually pivoted on the capital budget. And when you're talking about budgets, you're talking about, of course, the fiscal expenditure of the federal government. And the intention will be how it impacts the larger percentage of the people. But over time, over the years, the Nigerian budget had more or less been allocated, had been resource allocated to a few number of people, because you had higher percentage of the budget in going to recurrent expenditure, and followed by debt service. You know, if you also do a comparison of the budget 2025 with that of budget 2024. You see that the critical components, and when I say critical components, we'll be talking about the recurrent, the non-debt recurrent, the debt service, possible deficit, and capital. Capital was a doddering percentage, you know, of the 2024 budget at 7.72 trillion. Compared to recurrent, it was about 8.2 trillion, and then debt servicing at 8.6 trillion. So now when you look at that bracket of the critical components of 2024, and you compare to what we have in 2025 at 24 trillion, more or less, 23.96 trillion, exactly. Say rounded up at 24 trillion for capital, nothing could be more exciting for some of us. For the first time, I could sit back and say that in a way you have a distinction between resource allocation to capital, which impact a larger percentage of the people, you know, compared to recurrent. This time around, we have a recurrent at about 13.6 trillion or so. And we also have debt servicing at about 14.8. What's even 14.6? But what even impressed me most is that the National Assembly did a lot of work reallocating, reworking, aside the the near 5 trillion that the president added before the conclusion of the budget process. The fact that the National Assembly had in a way also managed the percentages, you know, the percentage allocation to this critical component. For instance, the initial presentation by the president had debt servicing at about 16.5 trillion.
Exactly.
You know, and the National Assembly reduced that to 14, you know. In fact, they reduced initially to 13 before moving it back to 14 point something trillion. And recurrent was also about 14 point something trillion, and they reduced it to 13 trillion. So you see a consciousness of managing the budget structure in a way that it will reflect more of capital expenditure, and for us that is a major positive, for the 2025 budget.
A very interesting insight from you on the aspect of the budget benchmark and the rest. There's something that the president said that is quite, laudable, that many Nigerians look forward in case in this particular budget. The president said, we are witnessing progress in the economy. Do you share that sentiment with the president? We are going to go to details of the budget, but one of the statements he made was that we are witnessing progress in the economy. And for 2025 budget, it means there will be more progress. So do you share in that sentiment that there is progress in the economy so far?
Yeah, I think I want to subscribe to the president's submission. One, depends on where you are coming from. We have situational analysts, and we have, of course, process analysts. I am a process analyst. I don't look at what is now. I look at what has, what is, and what ought, what would happen. If there are some analysts that are determined to stay in the pre-2023 era, where, of course, we had subsidy and, of course, what do you call it, multiple exchange rate windows and all that. And some analysts will determine that was our era of utopia.
Exactly.
But again, some of us had always insisted that was suspicious. There's a superficiality around that era, and that there was a need to break, into a real developmental surge. And to do that, we need to encourage market forces. So with the coming of the president and the courage, to conceive and deploy the policy on fuel subsidy removal, and of course foreign exchange harmonization, as part of the larger, policy deployments that might also affect some other aspects of our national economic life that still needed to be addressed. But of course, these two fundamental, what I call flagship policy deployments, had caused a disruption, in truth, caused a disruption in our economic life, and it was like it's what we call a thermal effect.
Or a tsunami.
Changed our lifestyle, the way we look at like living and all that. And of course, there was upsurge in prices of commodity because, of course, the holding down of price of petrol, and of course rates, which is the actually transaction cost or price of foreign exchange, because we had over time held them down by policy, and reflected a kind of cheap cost of living, but in truth had in many ways reduced and limited our growth and developmental trajectory. So this is like releasing the Nigerian economic fiscal space to developmental momentum. So for me, I agree with the president, because now we are talking about our real, the actual. Any price that you are talking about is the actual price. It is not the subsidized price. It is not the artificial price. It is not the superficial price. Those are the prices we have been living with before. So if we see this reality as this pricing reality as our new reality, as far as I'm concerned, is a show of growth, is a show of development. So now, if you now also take that vis-a-vis what we are talking about, the current, 2024 GDP. That was the first full year, administration, of the president. And if we're able to do that 3.4%, coming from a 2.7% in 2023, it shows we are growing. Exactly. There are talks about the economy being rebased. We have not seen the figures. So what it means is that the 3.4 2024 budget, GDP figure, is a reflection of where we are coming from. So we have actually grown in the real sense of it. But we are still on the journey. We are yet to even start flying, as it were. So to a large extent, I accept and of course subscribe to the President's submission about development. Development and growth, because the prospects are there, because we are just gathering momentum, and when all these policies come to fruition, are crystallized, the impact will be obvious. And I believe that the way to go is positive, because any economy that you allow price to express itself by being determined by market forces would of course reflect eventually in profit. And any economy should be driven by profits. Any economy that is not driven by profits is a constrained economy. Because after the profit, then you start determining what you want to do with the profits. You can socialize your profits by saying, okay, there are some vulnerable, there are vulnerable segments of the economy that we need to attend to. Take that part of the profit and socialize it. You know, you take that same part of the profit and use it as reinvestment. You know, you take that part of the profit and use it as savings. You know, so, but if you do not, if you run an economy that is not profit driven, it's like running into a muddy water.
Now, talking about running into a muddy water, I think the president also agreed that at a point in time, this country was running into a muddy water. And he said something very, very fascinating. He said, at the point in our national life, we were faced with a turbulent takeoff. And that turbulent takeoff, as rightly pointed, is a journey that we are going. But there's a question behind this turbulent takeoff, these processes, the exchange rate, the subsidy removal. Many Nigerians are still very skeptical about the fulfillment of the promises of the government. And that's why this topic of our discussion, leverage on 54.99 trillion budget, is very, very key. Do you also agree, even though we are all accepted that we have a turbulent takeoff, but the brighter future that the president is pointing us to, is the government very, very serious about achieving that from your own understanding of their policy and their policy implementation?
Well, a budget is a policy, and that is why it's an appropriation act. It's the aggregation and distillation of the thoughts, ideas, and direction of a government, expressed in figures. So what we have now, it's the trust of the government. And you can now, when you look at the budget structure, just like as I noted, you have about an item that takes about 42% of that budget size and is encapsulated in the capital budget. It shows that the government is ready to serve more Nigerians, you know, with capital projects. Now, everybody agrees that an economy that is deficient in infrastructure, and infrastructure actually, it is capital project that translate to infrastructure. So an economy that is deficient in infrastructure is principally not business enabled. And when you are not business enabled, it also has that ricochet effect. Ricochet effect because in the sense that, one, employment is constrained, growth is constrained, general transaction is constrained. So you have an economy that is not productive. The federal government, for instance, had about 35,000 road responsibility.
Exactly.
That's the length, the measure of the percentage, or rather the measure of road that belongs to the federal government to manage. And for instance, you have just about 500 billion naira as capital. How do you want to even start? You know? And we also know that when you have a good road or a network of roads, it impacts the movement of goods and services. And the movement of goods and services enhances economic activities. At the end of that value chain, you are talking about profits. Okay? Now, we are also talking about power. It's also infrastructure. You know, we are talking about airports. It's also infrastructure. We are talking about railway. The availability and the efficient management of this infrastructure help in the business, in the economy, of the jurisdiction. So in a way, people that are living within that jurisdiction becomes beneficiary, direct beneficiary, either when you are constructing road, railway, airports, hospitals, schools, all this construction are employment and facilitators. Okay, when they are after construction, they become business facilitators. So you have somewhere a producer in Gusau who wants to transport his products from Gusau to Ibadan or to Lagos. He is given the possibility of moving those products cheaper, at a cheaper rate if he's using railway, for instance, or at a faster rate if he's using road network, and then of course at a faster, at a more convenient pace to move from one point to the other. So one, it's likely it will not post adverse products, losses would be minimized. Movement would of course also be cheaper, and the cheapness of that cost of movement will reflect in the unit price. Of the product. At the end of the day, at the end of it, the buyers, these consumers at the end of that process is buying cheaper products. It's a better scenario than where there are no roads. Just the simple example of no road, no good railway lines network, etc., where by the time you are moving at 10 naira per unit, and you get to the city gate at 20 naira per unit. So who is benefiting, who is losing? So just the provision of this facility, this infrastructure, fed by the government, help in a way in facilitating cheaper economic activities, and of course at the end of it, cheaper products.
Exactly. Now I agree with you on that aspect because of the component capital of that budget is very, very large. But the president even said, he said, on the part of the component of the budget, national security infrastructure is very, very key. Energy, human capital development is also very, very key. Health education and skill development is one of his priorities. But let's now go to areas that is very, very key, very, very important in this particular discussion. The revenue target of the government, 41 trillion. Let me just put it at 41 trillion is their target. And with this kind of target that the government is looking at, it's very, very, people have looked at it and say, okay, is it an achievable target? 41 trillion. Initially, it was 34.6 trillion they were targeting. Now 41 trillion. And there is insinuation that one of the areas that the government is looking to raise this money, apart from crude oil, has to do with the tax policy that is coming. What's your take on that regard, sir?
I think the FIRS, Federal Inland Revenue Service, and the Nigerian Custom had already transformed revenue generation perhaps into a new crude oil.
Exactly. Non-oil sector.
Yes, because now we are earning more in the fiscal sphere. We are earning more from taxation, taxation and levies than from crude oil. So in 2024, the FIRS was able to generate about 21 trillion, more 22 trillion, and the customs generated about 5 trillion. So when we put the two together, it was 27 trillion for just from those two agencies alone. And so the clear indication is that more money, more revenue is possible to be secured, to be generated. The important thing is to have the administrative threshold or the administrative platform to be able, to secure or expand the base of revenue generation in Nigeria. And that was the basis of the president increasing the initial proposition, budget proposition to the National Assembly by 5 trillion, by close to 5 trillion, because there was also a model calculation to realize that, it's possible to have this 5 trillion because there are by what the FRS are done and the
custom.
SCS, it means that they can add more, and especially from the government-owned enterprises. You know, so to a large extent, it's possible. And what had also saved us from the burden of historical non-performance in revenue generation, sincerely, had been subsidy. So the percentage of revenue that we commit to subsidy had always been high. So now, more or less, we are released, liberated, you know, that percentage from that we always committed to subsidy now to expenditure. And thankfully, it's not just about recurrent expenditure. Recurrent expenditure applies to civil servants, political office holders, and at the best, public servants. All of these do not count up to 5 million out of the larger Nigerian population. And we are talking of more than 200 million people. So when you have recurrent being the major sub-component of a budget, you feel uncomfortable. And that's why I made that remark in the opening. You know? So now we are able to free so much revenue from fuel subsidy that we used to commit before. But thankfully, that's the released fund, the released revenue is no longer going into also recurrent revenue. It's going to capital. So when it comes to capital, the average Nigerian would have access to it because it is capital that will give you roads, it is capital that will give you airports, it is capital that will give you increased megawatts of electricity, you know, any other thing that, so you can access those things as individual and use them in a way that it will profit you. Even if it's not profiting you, it's providing convenience to you. It is also that will also, because we need to also, of course, differentiate between the hard nut infrastructure and social infrastructure, education. Access to health facilities. These are basic social infrastructure. A healthy mind is a wealthy mind. So if you have good hospitals that you can access, it makes living, you know, more convenient, more comfortable, and of course you can even think better. And you have access to education, it also makes you a better person. You know, there are jurisdictions that have made professionalization, you know, the core of their resources. You know, India, for instance, became a major supplier of labor, of professional labor to the world at the point in time. Nigeria, in a way, is also a major supplier of professional labor to the world. Most developed countries have Nigerian medical professionals. You know, not doctors alone, nurses, pharmacists. Most of them have them in a large quantum, you know. So, in a way, and I don't have any problem with JAPA. If you are able to JAPA, it means that you have gone to earn foreign currency for Nigeria.
Exactly.
And that is why we are also seeing increase in diaspora remittances, you know, at this time. Because we have professional Nigerians. When people were bothering, here is Trump, he's going to start. I told people, most Nigerians out there are qualified Nigerians, you know, and document. Yes, we'll still have a number about 3,000, 5,000 that are suspected not to be not to be documented. But most Nigerians out there are well educated, are professional, and properly engaged. You know, so for me, providing access to education for Nigerians is a way of development, you know, professionally. And you can use them domestically and, of course, export them.
I really love your submission on that aspect of JAPA, because a lot of people are reconstruing what JAPA is all about. They just see it as opportunity whereby it's only drug baron, 419, Yahoo boys that go outside. It's more than that. Countries celebrate their export, particularly human capital. Like India that you mentioned, Chinese are there. Even Europe at the time, they were exporting outside the country. Go to other. But another critical aspect of this discussion in this regards of the budget, particularly leveraging this budget, because my concern and the concern of this show today is that we must ensure that this 54.99 trillion naira impact Nigeria. And one of the ways to ensure that it impact Nigeria is implementation, full implementation of the budget. But here we are. We have a scenario right now. 2024 budget is running. It will end in June. 2025 budget is also here. Prof, I mean, help us to understand the side-by-side running of these two budgets.
A major constraint to budget implementation is revenue. As you know, a budget is made of two sides. Projected revenue, projected expenditure. There is nothing actual about it. So, and the performance is also measured on how much revenue was generated to implement the projected expenditure. So where there is an imbalance or there is a widespread between revenue generated, of course, I mean, there is a widespread between revenue generated and expenditure. Then you have balance, I mean, a low performance of the budget. So what will make this budget happen and work is the likelihood of revenue, crystallization of projected revenue. So once revenue is crystallized, it's most likely that, because I think we have a president who also has a zeal. And anytime I am doing my meditation, I also bring, of course, when you are doing fundamental analysis, even for a company, a basic consideration in that fundamental analysis is the nature and character of the chief executive officer. So I sat down before to do a Nigerian sovereign fundamental analysis. We have resources, we have this, we have that. What about the chief executive officer? The president is our chief executive officer. What kind of person is he? What's his tendency? What's his history? Where's his legacy, precedents and all that? And I came to the conclusion that this person has zeal and vision. So if you have that two combination, it's like, and of course, it micromanages. And when you have that tendency, it's likely you have the capacity to oversight. What we need at this point in time is a CEO that can oversight every aspect of the national economy. So you want this done. You are asking the minister who is responsible for it virtually every day. How far have you gone? What are your challenges? What are your outcomes and all that? So I think to a large extent, I think the being of the president, the character of the president, when it comes to play, we should be able to realize this. Don't forget that even before we started off large ticket projects, the president came with the Lagos Calabar highway. Perhaps the largest, biggest ever envisioned projects, that we can have in Badagry, Sokoto. Yeah. So I think, and all these are part of the current of that 24 trillion. When we're talking about the budget, let us look at it is the 24 trillion that is important to us.
Exactly.
I'll
still come to that, but I'm just looking at the loopholes, the gaps that analysts, economists have discovered in that budget. Just like rightly pointed, the revenue is very key. No, there are people who believe that 41 trillion is very ambitious. How possible? What are the modalities to achieve this on one side? That's why we really put together the 2024 own and 2025 own. Because the 2024, why we suffer for 2024 was that there was shortage of revenue. And that's why the government have to extend it into 2025. Now we are having a very ambitious budget for 2025. Are we not going to encounter such problem again? That's one. Now, let's now look at the capital project again. Road infrastructure is taking.
Let's take that so that we can clarify it properly. Just like I said, budget is impeached on revenue. So if revenue generated is not enough, you have a low performance. But again, don't also forget that we had an overhang of subsidy.
Exactly.
We had issues with money being earned, but being
exchange rate differentiation. I took it to my news today. Exchange rate differentiation
very high. So, but I think the what we have now, it's the threshold is different. We can be sure of what we are coming from, where we are coming from. By starting 2021, 2022, we started experiencing I mean, especially in the aftermath of COVID. The major source of revenue for Nigeria, crude oil, started falling. Why? Because we shuttered virtually all our rigs during that period. And if you speak with an oil sector engineer, it will tell you the challenges of resurrecting a rig. You know, so it is easy to shutter it, but it's challenging, you know, to resurrect it. So we had that problem of low crude oil production, and crude oil production is such an easy thing. You know the quantity you are producing, you know what the world market price is. At every point in time, you know what your revenue is. So 2022, 21, 22, 23, we're talking of, in fact, at the point in 2022, it went below 1 million barrels.
Yes.
You know, people were stealing. Even international companies were not out of it.
Very you know? Funny situation.
You know. And for a long time, most of 2024 were doing sub 1.3. So if you are doing sub 1.3 times 70, an average of $70 to $80, whatever, your earnings, that's a clear crystal, you know, revenue threshold that we can relate with. But now we have seen an increment from that sub 1.3 to sub 1.8, specifically 1,750,000. The budget estimate is 2.06. So, and is it possible? One, we have heard that stealing, crude oil stealing has been reduced fantastically, and I hope it is true, to 5,000 barrels a day.
That's what NUPR said.
Now, I am one of those people that try and contextualize my analysis on the announcements made by government institution. In the military era, we used to be very, how do I call it, suspicious of government information. But in a democracy, being a Democrat myself, I try, because you can engage, and that's why we have the Freedom of Information Act, you can engage. So to a large extent, I give the benefit of doubt for information coming from government agencies and institutions. So if government had told us that they have moved from which is 1.7, 1.3, 1.2 to 1.750, and that the target is this 2.06, and the NUPRC had also come out to say that our potential is actually 2.2 million. God, it means that we are able to get from that side. I mean, from crude oil earnings. And again, of course, lately energy, we had our energy has also suffered some sort of stealing experiences and all that. But the whole of the expected revenue from crude oil sector is just about 35%. So the major earnings will come from the non-oil sector. And then, thankfully, you are also a stock market expert. Exactly. If you do a review of companies coming to the market with their results, except for Nigerian breweries and MTN, who had a lot of foreign exchange losses, most companies are returning, you know, high earnings, you know, and that is why the market is bubbling. You know, Presco, you know, Okomo Oil, what do you call it?
Enicel and rest of them. Enicel was just one of those companies that joined them
lately. You know, Aradel, you know, very good results. So when you see that, if a company comes to the market with huge results, it has a translation in the profit after tax. And the profit after tax goes to the government, you know. And so to a large extent, in 2024, there was a higher earning, you know, from company tax than from crude sales, you know. So, and that is the projection. So if, and just like I said, the FRS is targeting 25 to 26 trillion this year. The NSC, the Nigerian Customs Service, is targeting up to 7 trillion, you know. So at just those two alone are giving us over 30 trillion.
And,
then we now have government-owned
enterprise. Although not much as expected. Although the crude oil earnings that the government is about 19 trillion.
Yeah.
We just hope they cannot. But because of time and we're about to shut down this show today, what's your advice to the government, particularly on this budget? Because we can't say it all. Because the bottom of all these issues around how this budget will impact Nigeria. Either people in the rural area, interior part of the country, people in the city, people in the urban city, sub-city, everybody looking at federal government. But nobody talking about state government.
Yeah,
but your advice to Nigerian government and to Nigerian people, let's take that before we
well, we first, caveats. There's no way a particular budget for a year addresses all the concerns, of an economy. That's the first caveat. The second caveat, the federal government is just a lone tire in the hierarchy of tiers of governments. You have the state, you have the local governments. It is important Nigerians always, consciously, look at what the federal government is doing, what the state government is doing, and what the local government is doing.
Doc, we need to leave it here.
All right.
I hope we'll have the opportunity to bring you here once again so that we can expose this issue of the budgeting. Another aspect, Doc is someone that is very versatile in the financial investment sector of Nigerian economy. Although time is not always our friend on this show. This will be the size of our show today. But many thanks for many of you that stay tuned to watch the show today. Tomorrow is another day. And before then, enjoy the rest of your day.